My perfect stepbrother used me as a training dummy until I bled, then played protective mentor in front of our parents. So I let him torment me until he slipped up and exposed himself to show everyone his true nature. It worked. But now, years later, he's back and I think I know what he wants. My older stepbrother used to hit my pressure points until I collapsed in pain. One time I borrowed his laptop charger without asking, and he performed so many nerve strikes on my arms that I ended up going to swim practice looking like I'd been attacked by a wild animal. His reasoning? I was contaminating his space in our blended family. When I turned 14, I started to get sick of it. It all started when I accidentally left the garage door unlocked. He cornered me while I was organizing my swim gear and started hitting pressure points along my spine until I was screaming. But I was ready. I blocked his strike and pushed him back. Except my little act of resistance didn't feel as good as I thought it would. In fact, it made me feel worse. So much worse that I started crying for being such a terrible stepbrother and let him hit me back 10 times harder. And don't get me wrong, I loved my parents. But I know they saw my bruises. The strange circular marks. I know they could hear me crying in my room after his attacks. But they never did anything because in their eyes, he was the brilliant martial arts champion who was helping our family adjust after the marriage. Plus, when we were at swim meets, he had the protective older brother roll down to a science. H give me technique pointers in front of the coaches. H introduced me as his talented little stepbrother to all his friends. It was sickening. But one good thing did come out of it. My pain tolerance, you see, I channeled all that hurt into swimming. So by 16, not only was I junior national qualifier in the 200 butterfly, but I could endure training sessions that would break other swimmers. He was a senior at this point, grade above me. And I was constantly hearing about his robotics team drama. At this point, he had eased up on the nerve strikes, mostly because it'd gotten stronger. And all I wanted was to have a good relationship with him. So, when his entire robotics team abandoned him before the state championship for Maya's team, I knew I had to help. Maya and my stepbrother had been feuding over some guy named Elijah. My stepbrother spent the whole morning raging about how his team had betrayed him and his project would fail. I spent the entire day fixing it. I contacted everyone I knew with engineering skills, kids from swim team, other schools, even some college freshmen I knew. Told them about the cool project, the potential scholarship opportunities. By 8:00 p.m., I'd gotten 6 people to join his emergency team. The competition prep was incredible. He pulled me aside halfway through, determination in his eyes, and said I was the best brother he could have asked for. We even stayed up all night finalizing the robot together. He kept telling everyone how it saved his project. For the first time since our parents married, I felt like we were actual brothers, or so I thought, because as it turns out, Elijah was Maya's lab partner, and he showed up at the competition with his new girlfriend around 11 a.m., started loudly commenting about how my stepbrother was so controlling he had to get his pushover stepbrother to beg people to join his team, how he was bribing random underclassmen to pretend they respected him. The judges took notice, and their scoring reflected it. 3rd place, not enough for the scholarship he needed. He didn't speak to me for 2 days. Then when our parents went to their anniversary dinner, I heard a knock on my bedroom door. It was him. Can we talk? He asked with uncharacteristic gentleness. I opened up and he immediately shoved me against the wall. You knew Elijah was Maya's lab partner. You invited him to humiliate me. You've always been jealous that I'm the favorite. He was holding his soldering iron, still hot from working on his electronics. Before I could even process what was happening, he lunged at my face with it. You ruined my future. I ducked instinctively. There was a sizzling sound followed by the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard. H pressed the soldering iron against his own face when he missed me, dangerously close to his right eye. Red blisters were already forming. He ran to the bathroom and I could hear him sobbing. I called 911 immediately, my hands shaking. He ended up needing skin grafts. The burn was 3rd degree and damaged his tear duct. When my parents got to the hospital and asked what happened, I just said, check his cloud account. Years of videos H recorded demonstrating his nerve strike techniques on me, calling me his practice dummy for when he had real opponents. Photos of my bruises H sent to online forums with laughing emojis. My dad's face went ghost white. My mom started crying. They separated us at the hospital. A nurse took me to a different room while they worked on my stepbrother's face. I sat there for 3 hours answering the same questions over and over. The police showed up around 2:00 a.m., 2 officers, both looking exhausted. They asked me to walk them through everything that happened. I showed them the videos on my phone. Years of recordings my stepbrother had made of himself performing tutorials on me, demonstrating exactly how to cause maximum pain without leaving obvious marks. Videos had downloaded from his cloud account that had discovered the password to when I was 14, just in case anyone ever asked why I sometimes limped or flinched when touched. The female officer's jaw tightened when she watched them. She kept scrolling through the files, her face getting darker with each video. My parents arrived at the police station around 4:00 a.m. Mom's mascara was streaked down her face. Dad kept running his hands through his hair, making it stick up in weird directions. They wouldn't look at me. The social worker assigned to our case was named Ms. Patel. She had kind eyes, but asked hard questions. She wanted to know about every incident I could remember, every nerve strike, every bruise, every time my parents saw what happened and did nothing. I told her about the swim practice incident, about the garage confrontation, about how my stepbrother would smile at family gatherings while pressing into pressure points on my back under the table. Ms. Patel wrote everything down in a small notebook. Child Protective Services got involved the next morning. A therapist named Dr. Rivera came to interview us at home. He was older than I expected, maybe mid-50s, with a gentle way of speaking that made me want to tell him everything. My stepbrother came home after 5 days in the hospital. The right side of his face was covered in white gauze. He couldn't open his eye without extreme pain. The doctors said H need multiple surgeries and the scarring would be permanent. There was concern about permanent damage to his vision. He moved into our guest room. Mom took time off work to help him with the bandage changes. I could hear them talking softly through the walls. Sometimes my stepbrother would cry, not the controlled, angry sounds I was used to, but real painful sobs. Dr. Rivera visited twice a week. H talked to each of us separately. Then together as a family. My parents had to attend mandatory counseling sessions. The court ordered it. They went every Tuesday and Thursday, coming home with red eyes and tight lips. School was weird. Word got out about what happened, though the details were fuzzy. Some kids thought it attacked my stepbrother. Others heard H hurt himself. Maya actually approached me in the hallway one day, looking uncomfortable. Elijah feels bad about what he said at the competition, she mumbled. He was just angry. He didn't mean to start all that. I just nodded. What else could I say? That his petty rivalry had triggered the worst night of my life. That my stepbrother was scarred forever because of a stupid robotics competition. Swim practice became my escape. Coach pulled me aside after the first practice back, asked if I needed time off. I told him I needed to swim more than ever. He understood, let me stay late doing extra sets until the facility closed. My stepbrother started physical therapy 3 weeks after the incident. The burn had damaged some nerves around his eye. He had trouble with his depth perception. I drove him to appointments because our parents were at work. We'd sit in silence during the 20-minute drive. One day, he spoke up. I know you hate me. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I don't hate you. You should. His voice was flat. I've been horrible to you. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to agree, to list every terrible thing H done, but seeing him struggle to keep his damaged eye open, watching him wince when the physical therapist stretched the scarred skin around his face neutralized that impulse. Ms. Patel called a family meeting 6 weeks after the incident. She brought Dr. Rivera, who specialized in family trauma. They sat us all down in our living room. We need to discuss long-term plans, Ms. Patel said. The criminal investigation is ongoing, but we need to focus on healing as a family. My stepbrother had to complete anger management classes, court-ordered, like our parents' counseling. He went every Monday evening. I'd see his workbook sometimes left on the kitchen counter, pages of exercises about identifying triggers and managing emotions. The investigation revealed more than anyone expected. Ms. Patel had interviewed my stepbrother's online friends. Several admitted they'd been uncomfortable with the videos he shared. One guy, Connor, had even saved copies of particularly disturbing messages, planning to report them, but never following through. My parents had to face hard truths. The social workers didn't sugarcoat anything. They'd failed to protect me. They'd enabled my stepbrother's behavior. Dad broke down during one session, admitting H always known something was wrong, but didn't want to believe his son could be abusive. It would mean H failed as a father twice, first in his previous marriage, and now in this one. 3 months passed. My stepbrother's bandages came off, revealing angry red scars across the right side of his face and around his eye. He started wearing hoodies pulled low, even in warm weather. His friends visited less and less. The brilliant martial artist had intimidated everyone, became someone people whispered about in the halls. We ate dinner together every night now. Another court requirement. Supervised family time. Dr. Rivera would sometimes join us, observing our interactions. The conversations were stilted, careful. We talked about safe topics: weather, school, TV shows. One evening during dinner, my stepbrother dropped his fork. The clatter made everyone jump. He bent to pick it up, then froze halfway down, his hand going to his face. The scar tissue pulled painfully when he moved certain ways. I got up to help, but he waved me off. I've got it. His voice came out strained. He managed to grab the fork, but when he straightened up, tears were streaming from his good eye. Mom reached for him, but my stepbrother pulled away. Don't, just don't. He left the table, his food untouched. We heard his bedroom door slam. Dr. Rivera made a note in his folder. He always had that folder during our dinners. Never said much, just observed and wrote things down. The next morning, I found my stepbrother in the kitchen at 5:00 a.m. He was trying to make coffee, but couldn't judge the distance properly to see if H filled the pot correctly. Water was everywhere. Let me help, I said. He stepped aside without arguing. That's when I noticed the bruises on his arms. Fresh ones, purple and yellow marks that looked like fingerprints. What happened to your arms? He pulled his sleeves down. Nothing. The medication makes my skin bruise easily now, but I recognized those marks. I'd worn enough of them to know what they looked like. Someone had grabbed him hard. At school that day, I saw his former best friend, Jason, cornering him by the lockers. Jason was gesturing aggressively, getting in my stepbrother's face. My stepbrother just stood there, taking it. The guy who used to dominate everyone with his martial arts skills now couldn't even defend himself. I walked over. Everything okay here? Jason turned on me. Oh, look. The victim's here to save his psycho stepbrother. How sweet we're leaving, I said, guiding my stepbrother away. In the car after school, he finally broke. They all hate me. Every single person at school thinks I'm a monster. Jason grabbed me yesterday, said I deserved worse than some scars, said he wished the soldering iron had hit both my eyes instead. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me understood their anger. My stepbrother had hurt a lot of people over the years, not just me. But seeing him like this, broken and afraid, made my chest tight. Ms. Patel scheduled an emergency session that week. She'd gotten reports from the school about escalating harassment. My stepbrother sat hunched in his chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. We need to discuss alternative schooling options, Ms. Patel said. The current environment isn't conducive to healing. My parents exchanged looks. Dad spoke first. We can't afford private school. There are online programs, Ms. Patel suggested, or we could look into transferring to Westlake High across town. My stepbrother shook his head. I have 3 months left. I can handle it. But he couldn't. The next week, someone spray-painted abuser across his locker. The janitor tried to clean it off, but you could still see the ghost of the letters. He started eating lunch in the nurse's office. I tried to help where I could, walked him to classes when our schedules aligned, sat with him at lunch when the nurse wasn't available. My swim teammates didn't understand. Why are you protecting him? Alex asked during practice. After everything he did to you, I missed my flip turn. He's still my stepbrother. He's getting what he deserves, another teammate said. Coach overheard and made the whole team do 200 butterfly for punishment. We don't kick people when they're down, he said. That's not what this team is about. But the damage was spreading. Our parents started fighting more. I'd hear them in their bedroom at night, voices raised. Mom blamed Dad for ignoring the signs. Dad blamed Mom for babying my stepbrother. Both of them blamed themselves. One night, I heard a crash from their room. I found Dad sleeping on the couch the next morning. Been there ever since. Dr. Rivera increased his visits to 3 times a week. The court was monitoring our family closely. There was talk of extending the supervision period. My parents had to submit weekly reports about our progress. My stepbrother's physical therapy wasn't going well either. The therapist said he was developing compensatory movement patterns that could cause long-term problems. He needed to do exercises at home, but given up. I started going to his room after dinner, making him do the stretches. Resist at first, but eventually gave in. We'd sit on his floor, me counting repetitions while he worked through the pain. Remember when we used to swim together? He asked one night during stretches, before I got mean. I did remember. We'd been almost friendly when our parents first married, before high school changed everything, before he decided I was an embarrassment to him in front of his martial arts friends. What happened? I asked. When did you start hating me? He was quiet for a long moment. I never hated you. I hated that you were better than me, more natural in the water, more genuine with people. Everyone actually liked you for you. They only respected me because I made them afraid not to. The admission hung between us. I helped him with the final stretch. Watching his face contort with pain as the scar tissue pulled. 2 weeks before graduation, everything imploded. My stepbrother had been doing better, keeping his head down, just trying to make it through. Then someone posted the videos online, all the tutorials made using me as his demonstration subject over the years. The post went viral in our school community. Parents started calling for his expulsion. The principal had to hold an emergency assembly about cyberbullying. It didn't matter, the damage was done. My stepbrother didn't come home that night. My parents called the police at midnight. I drove around looking for him, checking all the places I thought he might go. The community pool where we'd sometimes swim on weekends. The martial arts studio where he used to train. I found his car at the old quarry outside town. The place where nearly drowned as a child. Before his dad left, before his mom met my dad, he was sitting on a rock ledge, staring down at the dark water below. Don't, I said. Approaching slowly. I wasn't going to jump, he said. I just needed to think. I sat beside him. We stayed there for an hour. Not talking, just existing in the space between what was and what could have been. I'm sorry, he finally said, for everything. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I know, I said, and I did. The apology didn't erase the scars, physical or emotional, but it was a start. We drove home separately. Our parents were waiting along with 2 police officers. There were procedures for missing persons, even ones who came back. More reports, more documentation. Ms. Patel arranged for my stepbrother to finish school from home. The principal agreed it was best for everyone. Get his diploma but wouldn't walk at graduation. Another consequence of that night with the soldering iron. The house felt different with him home all day, quieter despite his presence. He spent most of his time in his room working on assignments and attending virtual anger management sessions. I'd check on him between my own classes and swim practice. Sometimes I'd find him doing his physical therapy exercises without prompting. Other times be staring at his reflection, fingers tracing the scars on his face and around his eye. Our parents' marriage was hanging by a thread. They'd started couples counseling on top of everything else. Some nights, Dad still slept on the couch. Mom had stopped cooking elaborate dinners, and we lived on takeout and frozen meals. Dr. Rivera pulled me aside during one visit. How are you handling all this? I'm fine, I said automatically. It's okay if you're not, he said. You've been through significant trauma. Your feelings matter too. But I didn't know how to explain the guilt that sat in my stomach like a stone. If I hadn't ducked that night, none of this would have happened. My stepbrother wouldn't have permanent vision damage. My parents would still be happy. Our family wouldn't be under constant supervision. The rational part of me knew it wasn't my fault. H lunged at my face with a hot soldering iron. Ducking was instinct, but rationality didn't make the guilt disappear. Swim season ended with me qualifying for Olympic trials in the 200 butterfly. I swam my personal best time. Couldn't believe it when I touched the wall and saw my name with Oli trial cut next to it on the scoreboard. But in the midst of celebration, I kept thinking about my stepbrother at home alone while everyone else cheered. After the meet, coach found me in the locker room. You've got a lot on your shoulders, he said. But you can't carry everyone else's burden. Sometimes people have to face their own consequences. He was right. But it didn't make watching my stepbrother suffer any easier. The guy had tormented me for years had become someone I worried about constantly. The irony wasn't lost on me. Graduation day arrived with unusual May heat. I put on my cap and gown, trying to feel excited about the milestone. My parents came separately, sitting on opposite sides of the auditorium. My stepbrother stayed home. As I walked across the stage, I thought about him sitting in his room watching his classmates' Instagram stories of their celebration. Part of me wanted to skip the after parties and go home, but Dr. Rivera had been clear I needed to maintain my own life, my own milestones, so I went to Alex's party, tried to act normal, but when someone made a joke about Cyclops stepbrothers, I left, found myself driving home, still in my graduation gown. My stepbrother was in the backyard attempting to fix the pool filter. The physical therapist had suggested mechanical work for his depth perception rehabilitation. He looked up when he heard the gate. Shouldn't you be celebrating? He asked. Felt like fixing things, I said, grabbing a wrench. We worked in silence, dismantling and cleaning the filter system. The sun beat down on us, making the scars on his face glisten with sweat. By the time we finished, we were both dirty and exhausted. Thanks, he said simply. That night, for the first time in months, our whole family ate dinner together without supervision. Dad had come home early. Mom had actually cooked. We sat at our usual spots. The empty chair where Dr. Rivera usually sat somehow louder than his presence. I qualified for Olympic trials, I announced, in the 200 butterfly. I'd been holding on to the news for weeks. My parents smiled, the first genuine smiles I'd seen from them in months. Even my stepbrother looked pleased, though something flickered behind his good eye. That's amazing, he said. You deserve it. After dinner, he knocked on my door. Can I ask you something? I let him in. He sat on my desk chair, his scarred side partially hidden in shadow. Do you think we'll ever be normal again? He asked. Our family, I thought about lying, giving him false hope. But we'd moved past pretty lies. I don't know. I said honestly, but maybe we can be something different, maybe better. He nodded, understanding. We'd never have the relationship we could have had. Too much damage, too much history, but perhaps we could build something new from the wreckage. Ms. Patel visited one last time the following week. The official supervision period was ending. We'd completed all court requirements. The investigation had concluded with no criminal charges, just mandatory counseling and supervision. You've all made significant progress, she said. But the real work starts now, 6 months later. I stood behind the starting blocks at Olympic trials. The arena was massive, cameras everywhere, the crowd deafening. I adjusted my goggles, trying to control my breathing. As I stepped onto the block for the 200 butterfly preliminary heat, I glanced up at the stands. My parents were there, sitting together for the first time in months, and next to them, partially hidden under a hoodie but unmistakably present, was my stepbrother. I dove in at the start signal, feeling the familiar rush of water with each stroke, each turn. I felt the weight of the past year lifting. Not gone, it would never be completely gone, but lighter somehow. When I touched the wall and looked up at the scoreboard, it advanced to semifinals. As I climbed out of the pool, I could see my stepbrother standing now, his scarred face visible as his hood fell back, clapping with genuine pride. We locked eyes across the distance, and in that moment, I understood something fundamental. Some wounds never fully heal. Some relationships can never be what they should have been. But in the broken places, in the scars that remain, sometimes something unexpected can grow. Not forgiveness, exactly that word was too simple for what existed between us now, but something like understanding, something like respect, and for now, that was enough.